The invasion begins. The Zorvith Dominion had conquered dozens of worlds without effort. Their warships, sleek and bristling with advanced weaponry, hung over Earth like silent predators. To them, humanity was nothing more than another primitive species to be subjugated, a planet of warring tribes still reliant on fossil fuels and outdated projectile weaponry. High General Varek stood aboard his command vessel, surveying the blue world below with detached arrogance. "This should take no more than 3 days," he muttered. The invasion began with surgical precision. Orbital bombardments disabled major military bases in minutes. Nuclear silos were destroyed before retaliatory launches could be ordered. Cities fell into chaos as Zorvith ground troops landed in towering drop pods, disintegrating resistance with energy weapons. Entire communication grids went dark as alien AI systems disrupted human networks. Within hours, the planet was in disarray. The Zorvith fleet maintained air superiority. Their soldiers, clad in impervious battle armor, marched through the ruins of fallen capitals. Varek received reports of minimal casualties on their side. It was exactly as expected. Then the first signs of trouble emerged. In New York, a battalion of Zorvith troops advanced towards Central Park, expecting to round up survivors. Instead, they were met with an explosion, a makeshift IED buried under rubble, rigged with scavenged alien ordnance. The detonation annihilated an entire squad. Further south, in the Appalachian Mountains, resistance fighters disrupted Zorvith supply lines using guerrilla tactics, forcing the invaders to divert forces just to maintain control. Varek dismissed these as nuisances. They're simply delaying the inevitable. But soon, the reports escalated. In Tokyo, human engineers hacked into captured Zorvith drones, turning them against their own forces. In Berlin, a military cyber warfare division cracked into an alien command relay, intercepting battle plans and broadcasting false orders to enemy troops. In Brazil, resistance fighters lured Zorvith patrols into dense jungles, ambushing them with scavenged weapons and lethal ingenuity. The worst of it came from underground networks. Hackers across the globe, cut off from conventional communication, used ancient radio frequencies and mesh networks to coordinate efforts. They exploited weaknesses in the Zorvith AI, jamming enemy transmissions and even rewriting portions of their code to cause mass confusion. "This is not possible," one Zorvith officer reported. "Their technology is thousands of years behind ours. How are they adapting so quickly?" Varek clenched his jaw. He had underestimated them. Most species crumbled under the weight of an invasion. They surrendered, pleaded, or fled. But humanity was different. They were not just fighting back, they were learning, adapting, and, most concerning of all, they were winning small victories. The High General's confidence wavered for the first time. Humanity was proving itself to be more than just another conquest. It was a problem, a dangerous one. The underdogs strike back. High General Varek sat rigid in his command chair, staring at the latest reports. His golden eyes narrowed as he read the growing list of Zorvith casualties. Human resistance should have been scattered and ineffective. Instead, they had turned into a coordinated nightmare. "This is not how conquest works," he muttered. On the ground, human ingenuity was turning the tide. Though vastly outmatched in technology, they refused to engage the Zorvith head-on. Instead, they fought like a species that had spent its entire history in conflict, because they had. In the ruins of Paris, Zorvith patrols searching for survivors were lured into an underground metro system. As they descended, a series of hidden charges detonated, collapsing the tunnels behind them. Trapped in darkness, their motion sensors jammed. They became easy prey for human resistance fighters who picked them off one by one. In Washington, D.C., a captured Zorvith transport was repurposed by a group of military engineers. They reverse-engineered its security codes, allowing it to pass as friendly to alien scanners. Loaded with explosives, the disguised vehicle was driven straight into an enemy command center before detonating, wiping out an entire battalion. And in the heart of Moscow, humanity made its most audacious move yet. A team of hackers, operating out of a hidden bunker, cracked into the Zorvith command network. Within hours, they had gained control over portions of the alien supply chain. Food and weapon shipments meant for the Zorvith troops were rerouted or destroyed. Fuel reserves mysteriously drained overnight. Entire regiments found themselves stranded in hostile territory, their equipment malfunctioning as human-engineered viruses tore through their systems. This is impossible, one Zorvith officer stammered as his unit's targeting systems went offline in the middle of a firefight. Moments later, human snipers exploited the confusion, picking them off with pinpoint accuracy. The Zorvith war machine, built on the assumption of overwhelming superiority, was faltering. Their forces, designed for swift planetary takeovers, relied heavily on centralized logistics. Humanity had no such weakness. With nations uniting under a single cause, their decentralized and adaptive strategies made them nearly impossible to suppress. Frustration boiled within Varek. The humans were unlike any species they had ever encountered. They should have been begging for mercy by now. Instead, they were fighting smarter, harder, and worst of all, they were laughing. Zorvith troops reported hearing human soldiers joking in the middle of battle, taunting their enemies with absurd one-liners before launching devastating counterattacks. Some even blasted music over hijacked communication channels, old war songs, heavy metal, anything to disrupt enemy morale. Varek clenched his fists. This species was not just fighting for survival. They were enjoying the fight, and that, more than anything, terrified him. Turning the tide, High General Varek stood at the bridge of his warship, staring at the swirling data streams before him. Every flashing red icon marked another loss. His forces, once invincible, were being picked apart piece by piece. This was no longer an invasion. It was a war of survival, and humanity was winning. On the ground, the resistance had evolved into a full-scale counteroffensive. In the skies over Europe, Zorvith gunships, once untouchable, were being systematically hunted. Human engineers had reverse-engineered, captured alien targeting systems, integrating them with primitive yet effective missile launchers. A fleet of repurposed drones, originally designed for agriculture and delivery, had been outfitted with explosives and were now being used to conduct suicide runs against Zorvith command posts. In the Pacific, a Zorvith naval detachment attempted to secure Earth's oceans, but they had not accounted for human ingenuity at sea. Aircraft carriers, long thought obsolete against spacefaring enemies, proved devastatingly effective. Using an elaborate trap of underwater mines, disguised sonar signatures, and old-fashioned naval artillery, the humans ambushed the unsuspecting Zorvith forces, sinking their warships in a battle that should have never been possible. Meanwhile, in South America, resistance fighters made use of terrain in ways the Zorvith couldn't counter. Their heavily armored walkers became useless in dense jungles, where mud and vegetation clogged their joints. Human snipers, camouflaged with old guerrilla tactics, took down commanders before entire squads even realized they were under attack. But the true turning point came not from the battlefield, but from the minds behind the war. In a hidden bunker beneath Berlin, a coalition of the world's top scientists, engineers, and hackers finally broke the code that controlled Zorvith starships. The enemy fleet, once untouchable in orbit, had unknowingly left vulnerabilities in their networked infrastructure. The humans exploited this flaw with devastating efficiency. One by one, Zorvith ships in low orbit began losing control. Their targeting systems failed. Their weapons shut down. Some were even turned against their own fleet. One hijacked warship crashed into another in a fiery explosion, a spectacle visible from the ground. Panic spread through the Zorvith ranks. Soldiers in the field, cut off from leadership, began surrendering in droves. Others, unwilling to face their own failure, simply deserted. From his command ship, Varek's claws dug into his armrests. His empire had never lost a planetary invasion. The humans weren't just resisting, they were dismantling his army. Then came the final blow. A hacked Zorvith comms channel began broadcasting a single message, spoken in 100 different languages. "This is our planet. You will never have it." Varek's blood ran cold. For the first time in his long, decorated career, he knew the truth. The Zorvith Dominion had made a mistake. They had invaded the one species that refused to lose. And now they were doomed. Humanity's final stand and victory. High General Varek's claws trembled as he gripped the edges of his command chair. The war had spiraled out of control. What was supposed to be a swift conquest had become an unrelenting nightmare. His fleet was crippled. His ground forces were in full retreat. And worst of all, his enemy refused to break. From orbit, he watched in horror as the final Zorvith counteroffensive collapsed. In desperation, he had ordered the deployment of a last-resort bioweapon, designed to wipe out Earth's population within days. But before the pods could reach the surface, human fighter jets intercepted them, destroying every last one in midair. The humans had anticipated even this. Varek snarled, "Unacceptable." On the ground, the battle raged on. The remaining Zorvith forces were making their last stand in a fortified base in the Australian outback. But the humans were relentless. Using stolen Zorvith vehicles, they could bypass defenses and storm the compound from within. Soldiers fought alongside former civilians, wielding weapons they had scavenged or built themselves. And then came the final blow. A stolen Zorvith warship, now under human control, emerged from the clouds, its weapons trained on the remaining alien stronghold. The ship's comms crackled to life. A human voice, calm, confident, and utterly unafraid, spoke in the Zorvith language. "Surrender, or be erased." Varek's mind raced. How? How had these primitive creatures turned his own weapons against him? How had they outmaneuvered an empire that had stood for centuries? And then it struck him. It wasn't their technology. It wasn't even their numbers. It was their nature. The humans had never fought for power or territory. They had fought because they refused to be conquered. They had adapted to every setback, learned from every mistake, and turned the tide through sheer force of will. No species in the galaxy had ever fought like them, because no species had ever been as dangerous as them. Varek exhaled sharply. His army was gone. His fleet was compromised. His empire, his people, would be ashamed of his failure. But there was no victory left to claim. "Cease fire," he muttered. Across every remaining Zorvith unit, the order was relayed. Weapons powered down. Soldiers dropped their arms. The invasion was over. On Earth, a roar of triumph erupted across the planet. Humanity had done the impossible. Against an empire that had never lost, they had not only survived but won. As Varek was escorted from his command ship in chains, he cast one last look at the humans standing before him. They were battered, bruised, and bloodied. And yet they stood tall, unbroken. And for the first time in his life, High General Varek felt something he had never known before. Fear.